Welcome to this, the third of the Parsha Thoughts for the Week. The number 3 in Yiddishkeit has significant importance and reflects the idea known as chazaka, which is both ownership and permanence as well. I sincerely hope that this feature will continue to be a source of insight and hopefully inspiration, both for myself and for those who take the time to listen to this brief thought. This week's Parsha is in a way unique in that it's not in isolation. It comes directly off the back of last week, and not merely in time sequence, but in principle and in message as well. Last week's Parsha we encountered the giving of the Torah, at which every single soul, both present at the time and to be born in all future generations, were in actual fact present at the giving of the Torah, and each one of us made that declaration, Na'aseh v'nishma, that unbridled acceptance of the Torah and the mitzvahs. Many people unfortunately have the misconception that to be a spiritual and godly individual, one needs to ensure that the relationship between man and God is pristine and wholesome. This is expressed in the manner in which that we daven 3 times a day, we abide by the laws of kashrut, we don tefillin for the men, we light Shabbos candles for the ladies, keep the laws of Shabbos, and so on and so forth, mitzvahs that really have no relationship whatsoever for us and our fellow human being, but really in order to be able to connect to God and to be spiritual, divine and godly individuals, we need to embrace this and undertake it, and thereby have a wholesome relationship. This week's parsha comes ve'ela Mishpatim, and these are the statutes. Indeed, the parsha probably contains one of the most mitzvot of any single parsha in the Torah. And what is unique about these laws is that they're not, by and large, laws that relate to our relationship with Hashem, but rather they reflect the laws that pertain to how we conduct ourselves in business, to the manner in which we lend money, to taking a security and a surety from the individual. What happens if you borrow an item and it gets damaged? What happens if you hire an item and it gets damaged? Basically commercial litigation, commercial issues, the likes of which exist in every which country and civilization. And therefore it would be well understood if individuals would turn around and say that this segment of the Torah, those laws which direct us how we're supposed to lead our commercial, social lives, in actual fact is no different to the social judicial system that exists in every country. Every country has its own laws, its own rules and regulations. It has courts that will hear cases where those rules have allegedly been abrogated, judges who will sit on those cases, and indeed an entire judicial system that is backed by the power and the strength of a policing system to ensure that civil society continues along the lines that are instructed by the laws of the country. And therefore, many people assume that the laws of the Torah that express these self-same messages of a social and a civil society are nothing different than that which exists around us as well. They too are man-made, they too merely are there as a function of civil society and have nothing to do with spirituality or godliness. And therefore our rabbis point out that the term ve'ela mishpatim, with the vav, which is vav hamachaber, it means and, the letter vav means and more importantly it joins. It joins the previous with the current, it joins last week's parsha with this week's parsha. Just like we accept and we acknowledge that the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, many of which reflect the relationship between man and God, were given to us by God, so too these social responsibilities, these laws of the social judiciary, are also part and parcel of our relationship with God, not merely our relationship with man. To articulate this even better, the Torah expresses in this week's parsha in reference to the convert that one must be very careful not to insult them, not to remind them of the past, not to publicly shame and defame. Indeed, later on in the Torah, it extends this prohibition not only to the convert, but indeed to each and every single one of us, to each and every single Jew, not to do anything that would malign and shame and embarrass an individual in public. In the context of this week's parsha, the Talmud recounts a fascinating story about two of our great sages, Shmaya and Avtalion. It was known that at least one of them, they were both descended from converts, and at least one of them may have been descended from King Sancheriv, who was the king who banished and exiled the 10 tribes of Israel, of whom we have not heard from them since. And it so happened that Shmaya and Avtalion, both of whom descended from converts, were walking home one day from the Beis Medrash, escorted by an entourage of their disciples and students. Walking home at the same time was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. High priest in the times of the second Beit HaMikdash were unfortunately not always worthy individuals. And when this particular Kohen Gadol, when this particular high priest sees that these individuals, Shmaya and Avtalion, are receiving greater honor and dignity and respect than he is, he blurts out and he says, "Look at those descendants from the nations of the world." In other words, reminding them of their historic past, deriding them, and making himself out to be this perfect, pristine individual. After all, he is descended from none other than Aaron HaKohen. His lineage is clear. And Shmaya and Avtalion responded not so much merely to uphold their dignity, but to teach all of us and him a lesson. And he turned to them, and this Kohen Gadol, and said, "The descendants of the nations go in peace." And they responded very smartly, and they said, "Indeed, may those who are descended from the nations go in peace, those who go lead their lives as if they were descendants of Aaron, rather than being a descendant of Aaron and leading one's life as if one is in accordance and a descendant of the nations of the world." It's not so much the past, but it's the present. It's not so much where we come from, but who we are, that is most significant. And here the individual, this Kohen Gadol, understood the reproach and lowered his head in shame. But more shameful than anything was that he had the temerity to in public go and disgrace and shame these individuals. And the Torah clearly stipulates, not only that we may we not do this to a convert, we may not do this to any individual. Unfortunately, often as one gets caught up in the heat of a moment, perhaps the easiest is to attack the individual. In English there's a saying, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me." In Judaism we don't believe that to be the case at all. In Judaism we understand that sticks and stones break your bones, but go to the hospital and we'll repair them. But a word spoken that hurts the heart, that maligns an individual, can never be retracted. As much as we may wish to apologize, and do apologize, and you harm a person in public, there's not much you can do. Indeed, it's those self-same people who are so meticulous about the laws between man and God that they do not allow anything to enter their mouths that is not strictly kosher. Somehow they are not so concerned with what comes out of their mouths, and are willing to malign and maledict individuals for whatever reason. The Torah, therefore, in this week's parsha reminds us that this responsibility to look after the interests and the sensibilities and the sensitivities of an individual is no less a part of our relationship with God than keeping the Shabbos or praying 3 times a day.